Hi, I'm John, and I'm an alcoholic.
I'm Tom, and I'm an alcoholic.
Tom and John, thank you for joining me and joining everybody here today and for these next 5 weeks as you guys enlighten me and as you enlighten us with your story. As Jim and I introduced previously, Tom and John are recovering alcoholics. Tom, this year, 40-year sobriety, right? John, you're working on 2. But for you two, this is a process, this is a walk, these are steps that you're going to take for the rest of your life. Is that right?
That's correct.
Tell me about that a little bit, how it's not just a 12-step process, but it's you'll be doing this forever. Go ahead.
Well, sobriety is a journey, and it starts the day we admit that we are powerless over alcohol, and it lasts forever. Alcoholism is a disease. It never goes away. It's progressive. If we don't stop, it will progress until we either go insane, we die, or we end up in jail. So it is a daily journey that we have to take one step at a time, one day at a time.
I agree. It's not just the 12 steps. It's an organic process that lasts the rest of your life. You don't become recovered. You're in recovery. So, from the point that you admit that you have a problem, it becomes a journey to stay on that path. And
one of the things that I look forward to really diving into with you two is not only hearing your story, but how your faith has helped, how your walk has helped your journey. Because these 12 steps, which we talked about earlier, these 12 steps of AA, God is in every step, right? And the first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So, powerlessness. So, that's, and I can assume that, and you mentioned this briefly, that becoming powerless and surrendering and letting go is a massive, massive first step. And that's probably, my guess is, with this process, it is one of the hardest steps, is taking that first step, right?
absolutely.
Tell me about you taking where you were, John, in that first and taking that first step.
It started, you begin to I found that there was a darkness in my life that just wouldn't go away. There was always, I was never content. And life had become unmanageable, truly unmanageable. And I was experiencing that powerlessness, and I knew there was something missing. And thank goodness that my roommate brought me into church on an Easter Sunday, and it was this church, and it had a profound impact on me. I knew that was the piece that was missing, and from that point on, I started gradually gravitating towards what I didn't know, but I knew there was something that was seriously broken that needed fixing. And eventually I walked into an AA room and made that surrender. That bridge, I said, okay, I'm broken, I can't do it. And until I could admit that, there was no fixing it.
Tom, you went something similar years ago when you were going through it. Tell me about your step on. You said that you and your wife at the same time went to AA. So tell me about that. How you took that first step, and how difficult that was.
I drank for 21 years. And my first drink was a pint of vodka, and I fell in love with alcohol at that point and never wanted to stop drinking. When I was in my marriage with my wife at the time, we began to have personal problems, and she ultimately went to a counselor and acknowledged that she was an alcoholic. I stopped drinking for a month and went to meetings with her to support her, quote, and I listened to what was being said, but I didn't think it was an issue for me. And after a month, I went back to my drinking. But things began to deteriorate not only with her, but with my job. And I kept going to meetings, and I heard them say, if your life is not working, maybe you need to try something else. And so time passed, and one Sunday morning, it happened to be Mother's Day, I wouldn't go to church with my family. I stayed home, and I was drunk by the time it was 11 o'clock. And what I know now to be the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, Tom, you need to get sober, but on your own you can't do it. You've got to have help. And at that point, I didn't believe in God. So I didn't know what was talking to me. But anyway, on Monday, the following day, I went to my first AA meeting on my own and admitted at that point that I was an alcoholic, breaking through the denial that I had held for 20 years.
How hard in both your situations, so breaking through the denial, how hard is that? Because there's got to be a massive, because it's a pride thing as well, right? It's like, I'm fine. I don't need help. I don't need to surrender. How hard is it to give up that denial in both your situations?
I would, I went through it for years. I mean, knowing I had a problem, but not being able to admit to it, fully, truly accept the fact that I was in the grips of alcoholism. But by doing so, the freedom, the liberation at that moment was like unbelievable. It was like at that point in time, I could fix the problem. Before then, it was abstract. I couldn't approach it because I was still in denial. So,
did it feel like, for both your situations, did it feel like a weight was off your shoulders when you first admitted? Tom, you mentioned to me earlier that when you went to your first meeting, you sat in the back, right? So it took a bit for you to admit. So share with me about that, about getting to that point to admitting your denial and kind of becoming and essentially surrendering, right? And essentially surrendering that you are here to get help.
Well, by the time I got to that point, the first step I began to do was admit that I was having problems in my life. And that was what opened me up to understanding that I had a real issue. And when I went to the meeting, I heard them say, if you got a problem, that problem is you. And that problem may be alcohol. And we went through a process of identifying different types of behavior that reflect an alcoholic. So what I did was, when I hit that point of knowing that I couldn't do it on my own, that was the beginning of my surrender. And when I went to a meeting and acknowledged for the first time openly that I was an alcoholic, it was like a burden was lifted off my shoulder. And by the way, I have never had to take a drink since that day.
40 years.
40 years.
That's amazing. How hard was it to resist when you were going through the process and when you finally admitted you're an alcoholic, right? And you had that weight lifted off your shoulders. How hard was it to resist that temptation to take that next drink during that time?
Yeah, that's something I went through early on with the about 6 months up until I actually took my surrender chip. And that was part of the reason that I took the surrender chip, because I realized I was powerless. There was nothing that I could do to stop myself from having that drink. And that feeling of lack of control in my life was a little overwhelming. You know, the fact that I couldn't stop what was going on in my life. I couldn't say no. That feeling of powerlessness right there was what kind of drove me to that surrender. And then, you know, at that point in time, it's learning how to live sober.
Explain to all of us. You said surrender chips, so explain to us what this, because there are different chips that you receive. So explain that to me and to all of us.
It's basically when you're willing to admit that you have a problem and that you can't manage it on your own. You need help. You know, you surrender to the fact that I need help with this addiction, with this problem, with this disease. And you, at that point in time, it very much does lift a weight off your shoulders. It lifts a weight off your, you know, because you're saying, I can't do this alone anymore. You know, I'm powerless against alcohol.
Is it something physical that you receive? You
Yeah,
say it's a chip.
A lot of places use the little poker chips.
Okay. Tom, did you receive those too? When we talked about earlier that it's, you know, the meetings are, you know, they're different for different people. It's like you went twice a day, you would go a few times a week. Did you receive surrender or either chips or reminders when you were going through this process?
Well, when I started, they told me to go to as many meetings as I could go to.
Okay.
And the whole idea of going to meetings when you're new is helping you to identify in. You've made that admission, but you need to get into the process. And the process is what helps you to recovery. There's a difference between being a non-drinking drunk and being a recovered alcoholic or a recovering alcoholic. And it's that process that we get into. For me, not drinking was a challenge. And I thought about drinking every day for years. At least 6 years after I stopped drinking, I thought about drinking every day. And I know that it never goes away. But I also know that from engaging in the process and surrendering to the process, and as we say, trusting in the process, that's what saved me.
That's that phrase right there, trust the process. We hear that a lot, like in sports, right? I'm a sports guy, so that's my career. So you hear the trust the process when people are trying to improve, you know, when they're like, I'm in golf, so when you're trying to improve a golf swing and all that. But that phrase, trusting the process, John, talk about that for a little bit, because that's something that you guys probably had to go into it to begin with, that you had to trust the process, and not just be there just because you needed to be there, but you needed to put faith in something, right? You needed to put faith in something higher or something bigger than just yourself. So talk to me a little bit. That was a great phrase. What this whole thing is, and surrendering, and surrendering, which is the big first step. What is trusting the process? What is trusting the process when you're going through this?
Well, I mean, part of it is that surrender, but then it's, you know, willing to admit that you've got that problem, and then that there's a solution, you know, and the solution is right there. It's And if you trust in the process, you trust in the program, you trust in the words that are before you in that book, there's a phrase in there that says, by the time you're halfway there, you'll be amazed. And it's true. It's there's happiness, there's joy along the path, but you have to work it. You have to believe in it, because if you don't put any faith in it, it's not going to work. And I think that's where it's tied into it's very much tied into my faith as well. My faith in God, because both journeys are very paralleled. I wouldn't. It's only by a gift of God that I'm sober today. He's got a purpose for me, and I'm thankful and grateful every day, because he showed me this. He showed me this program, and he allowed me another chance, another opportunity to live life. So,
and that all started on Easter Sunday.
The process began
the process started
in this
at
building.
this church,
yes,
in this building.
I was a little bit, probably a little bit under the weather from the night before, and probably didn't want to be here very much. But something spoke to me in this room, and it just, from that point, it resonated forward. And here I sit today as a living testimony of God's good love.
John, that's awesome, and that is going to be a crux of kind of how we go through here. This theme of powerlessness and surrendering. You two have both shared kind of when you first surrendered and trusted the process, when you first truly admitted that you were an alcoholic and that you were ready to go through the process. You guys shared with me earlier that that when you go to these meetings, everybody's in a different walk. They're in a different step. They're in different wavelengths. But you're all there. It's a comfort level. It's an intimate level, and everybody's supportive. So both you two, last question on this topic. When you finally surrendered and you let go and were ready to take these next steps, that moment with fellow members around you, what was that support like? What was that like?
Well, I'll start off with the phrase that really fits. It's unconditional love. And everybody in the room has the same situation in their lives with different facts, but they all want to recover from their alcoholism. And they all know that it takes a higher power and the support of a group in order for that to work. So the feeling that you get from being a part of that community is what's the word I want? Is absolutely sustaining. And that's the beginning of really trusting the process.
John, how about you? What was that moment like when you first admitted and first opened up and really first surrendered?
I remember the day clearly. I really do. It was a day meeting. It was a 10 a.m. meeting, and one of the persons there, at the end of the meeting, they say, is anybody ready to give up, the high cost of low life? It's like, however they say it, but they basically are inviting you up to, you admit you have a problem. And that's a difficult step. But it was very liberating at that point in time, because, you don't, like, the first time you're in that room, if you take a chip the first day, I mean, either you know you have an issue, or you're just going through the motions because you think it's a thing to do, because a lot of times you're very confused when you walk in there. You don't, I mean, it was very, to me, it was very abstract, even though I'd been in those rooms before. But it was very liberating. It felt like I'd finally admitted something deep down in myself that needed to be said, you know, and it felt like a beginning of a journey, and it has been. So
This I look forward to continuing this dialogue and continuing this conversation. This is going to be enlightening for me, and I hope that it becomes enlightening for everybody who's watching and listening. Thank you.